Did you know? The Stick of Truth actually started with what developers Obsidian Entertainment thought would be a prank phone call. South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone wanted to make a proper South Park game where they were heavily involved, and Obsidian was at the top of their list. Obsidian was surprised with how interested Parker and Stone were, especially after Parker surprised them with his extensive knowledge about Obsidian's games like Fallout New Vegas. Parker and Stone's company even financed the Stick of Truth from the very beginning. The final size of the Stick of Truth's team maxed out at around 50 people. New artists had to be hired, as many of Obsidian's artists preferred to work in 3 dimensions. One of the initial ideas for the Stick of Truth was to make the player sneak past people's home security systems. Parker and Stone mentioned this during the commentary for the season 16 episode Insecurity. The episode in question mocked security systems and was actually inspired by this unused game mechanic. Another way that the game has impacted the series is that, before the Stick of Truth, there was no concrete map of the town. Stone and Parker are both huge fans of RPGs and have several favorites that inspired the Stick of Truth's creation. This includes Skyrim, Paper Mario, Earthbound, and The Legend of Zelda. The duo also said that Paper Mario's visuals influenced the Stick of Truth's look, and that they loved the feeling of Earthbound, particularly how the game gave you control of a kid in a big world where something larger than initially perceived unfolds. The new kid, being a silent protagonist, was somewhat inspired by Link from the Zelda series. Matt and Trey underestimated how complicated making an RPG would be. During a Comic-Con 2013 panel, Parker said, "I really love playing Skyrim, as many people did, so I was like, let's do this is easy." Their ambition got the better of them, and they ended up writing a script that was over 850 pages long. Based on Stone's and Parker's aspirations for the game, both the South Park team and developer Obsidian jokingly predicted the game would release sometime in the year 2032. Parker and Stone were urged to cut a sizable amount of the script out and include some of it in future downloadable content. Parker and Stone were extremely against this idea and instead hoped to use leftover content in future episodes of the show. In the end though, some fairly notable chunks of the game were cut out. A fight against vampire kids was planned to take place in a church and cemetery, and hippies were also planned to appear as enemies. There were plans to include a giant underground kingdom for both the underpants gnomes and crab people, showing that the two species were at odds with each other. There's still a memorable scene involving gnomes in the final game, but there's only a single crab person that lives in the sewers. There are even plans to create an entire town based on Christmas. Mr. Hankey would reside there, but his home was ultimately downgraded to a tiny house in the sewers, and a giant monkey dragon was planned to appear as a boss. There was also an entire mission involving ginger kids. They would have stolen Cartman's precious doll Polly Prissy Pants, prompting Cartman to send the new kid on a quest to retrieve her. There was at least one other cut side quest involving Bebe and the fortune catcher. Earlier versions of the game also included 5 playable classes: Paladin, Wizard, Rogue, Adventurer, and Jew. The final types ended up being Fighter, Thief, Mage, and Jew. In the game's code, there's an unused Cleric class, which may have replaced the Paladin later in development before they cut it entirely. The Stick of Truth's costumes were taken from the 2002 South Park episode The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers. The episode featured all boys dressing up as characters from the Lord of the Rings universe, with several key events and characters mixed into the narrative. At first, Obsidian created ornate fantasy armors, weapons, and items for the game. Parker and Stone asked Obsidian to scrap the assets and make something that looked much crappier. The duo wanted any equipment to look poorly constructed, so it seemed like they were made by children. South Park Studios also provided Obsidian with full access to the show's archives and art assets. This allowed the developer to include unused Ching Pokemon designs that never made it into any episodes. The Stick of Truth was originally going to be published by THQ, however, THQ went bankrupt during the game's development, and the publishing rights were sold to Ubisoft. South Park's creators didn't know about THQ's situation until they heard it in the news, and were apparently excited when they found out Ubisoft had picked up the rights to the game. Matt and Trey wanted to make sure the show's controversial comedy made it into the game. Stick of Truth's creative consultant, Jordan Thomas, was adamant about giving Parker and Stone as much freedom as possible. Thomas told Destructoid, "The way we looked at humor was, if a moment was a hot button for the audience, should we make it worse? Because Parker and Stone love to push boundaries, and their default response was definitely not to back down. But the really healthy counterbalance was, can we make it funnier?" And the answer was often yes. It was definitely the right amount of pressure. The final North American version included plenty of adult humor, crazy scenes, and moments you'd expect from South Park. But it was the only version of the game that went completely uncensored. Ubisoft decided to censor the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of the game in multiple locations locations around the world. The publisher voluntarily blocked out 6 scenes, calling it a market decision made by Ubisoft EMA. The German version was specifically censored because of the use of swastikas, Nazis, and other Hitler-related imagery. When Parker and Stone found out about this, they decided to insert placeholder images in order to mock the changes. The European versions had certain sections replaced by an image of a disapproving statue with an explicit description of the events that were happening. The placeholder in the Australian version was similar, but featured a koala crying instead of the statue. The leader of Obsidian Entertainment, Fergus Urquhart, recalled the first time he watched the alien probing scene the evening before a meeting with Parker and Stone. Urquhart ultimately thought the scene was funny, but he knew he'd have to talk about it with Matt and Trey, especially when his wife called the scene atrocious. Urquhart told Eurogamer, "I'll be honest, for me that scene is funny as hell, but then it's hard for me to judge other people and whether they feel it should be in a game or not. That's really hard for me." The decision to censor the game was out of Obsidian's hands and ultimately down to Ubisoft, but Urquhart did say he would have stuck his neck out if the censorships would have gone too far, saying, "At some point, if the censorship had gone to even more of an extreme, and particularly if there wasn't a PC version, then I would have gotten more involved, as to say, this is getting ridiculous." Although a lot of the development period was hectic, there were some humorous moments. When Matt and Trey got excited about a quest in meetings, they'd break into character and start improvising dialogue in the kids' voices. Obsidian creative director Chris Avallone said, "Suddenly there'll be Cartman talking about the quest, and they'll be funny about it. You sit back and let them go, and you're like, now I understand how funny this area is going to be." That's all for today, everybody, but don't forget to subscribe to Did You Know Gaming for more facts and trivia, and if you want to see more South Park, click over here to see the cancelled South Park Grand Theft Auto clone for Xbox. And to link weirdly to Obsidian in a weird roundabout way because they made New Vegas, Fallout 4 has just come out, well, when I recorded these slides anyway, and I've made a video about Fallout 4 under 3 minutes long, won't take much of your time, it's just a quick review to let you know if you should get it or not. So if you want to hear more of my voice, then please go and have a look. Oh, and you can see my chest hair. I'm in a dressing gown. What do you call it in America? A dress robe? Is it a robe? I can't remember.